Does anyone here speak Japanese?
The question cracked through the air without warning, sharp enough to make every head lift. Why would a billionaire demand that in the middle of a high-stakes meeting? For a moment, no one could tell if it was anger, desperation, or something else entirely driving the words. Then his palms slammed against the polished wooden table, his voice slicing the silence like a blade. The vast conference room seemed to shrink at once, the weight of quiet pressing down as eyes flicked nervously from one face to another. No one dared to answer. And yet, in the corner where no one ever looked, a small figure stirred. Clara, a 10-year-old black girl with warm brown skin and tightly braided hair, the maid's daughter, had always been treated as invisible in these marble-lined rooms of wealth. No one could have guessed that the silence surrounding her was about to break with a revelation that would steal the breath from everyone present. Clara wore a plain uniform, a white blouse carefully mended by her mother to fit her small frame. Her braids brushed softly against her cheeks as she worked. Her presence was so ordinary, so easily dismissed, that she seemed like part of the furniture. Yet, when her voice rose, gentle but steady, the room froze in shock. Even the billionaire's fury faltered, giving way to stunned silence. In that instant, Clara was no longer a shadow. To understand how she had reached that moment, we need to return to the Ashford International Hotel lobby, a place where, every morning, sunlight streamed through the glass facade and scattered across the marble floor like a golden net. Revolving doors squeaked as they turned, letting in a constant flow of guests, tailored suits, rolling luggage clattering across the tiles, polished leather shoes striking in steady rhythm. In the middle of that bustle, tucked into a quiet corner beside a potted fern at the foot of the grand staircase, Clara knelt silently. With both small hands, she carefully polished the brass wheels of a luggage cart. The white cloth circled again and again, slow and precise. Not just work, but a lesson her mother had drilled into her. If you do something, do it all the way, even in the corners no one notices. Though she was only 10, her gaze carried the calm weight of someone much older. A few loose strands had slipped free from her braids, brushing her forehead whenever the air conditioning whooshed as hurried travelers passed. Her old uniform had been neatly altered to fit her, and her black shoes shone brightly from the polish she had applied the night before. Her mother, Mrs. Baines, had been the head housekeeper at the hotel for 8 years. Clara, though not officially on staff, was simply an extra pair of hands helping on weekends. Around her, the world spun heedlessly. 2 businessmen passed by, laughing loudly at a text message without even noticing her. A bellhop nearly tripped over her bucket of water, never bothering to apologize. At the front desk, her mother smiled patiently while struggling through halting French with a guest, her voice unfailingly soft. On Clara's skin lingered the faint scent of lemon wax, sharp and clean, masking the metallic tang of brass. She never rushed. Her hands moved at her own pace, as though she believed that one day, somehow, someone would finally pay attention. Then a sharp voice rang out across the lobby. "Does anyone here speak Japanese?" A refined woman in a wide cream hat, her gloved hands clutching a suitcase handle, stood impatiently at the concierge desk. The staff exchanged uneasy looks. One coughed, another fidgeted, but none stepped forward. Clara kept her head lowered, wringing out her cloth, droplets pattering into the bucket. She knew better than to speak now. At 10 years old, she had long since learned that her place was to watch, not to interrupt. The rhythm of hotel life was etched into her memory. At 9 in the morning, conference guests rushed out, name badges bouncing on their lanyards as they waved for taxis. At 10, the tour buses rolled in, unloading older couples and matching windbreakers who chatted in foreign tongues. By 11, the lobby quieted, an in-between hour when her mother always said to clean as much as possible. Clara finished with the luggage cart, pushed it back to the bellhop's post. "Thanks," murmured Toby, the young attendant, eyes glued to a stack of tags. His voice was mechanical, a reflex, not meant for her. She only nodded and turned toward the gleaming staircase. Her cloth circled again, wiping the gold-leafed rail as light spilled from the chandelier above. From this vantage, she could watch everything. The guest leaning close to whisper at the concierge, the businessman striding toward the elevator while flicking his watch. Clara had learned to read people's movements the way some children read storybooks. A man in a black suit passed and remarked, "Careful not to scratch that." His voice wasn't harsh, just the kind of warning that assumed she might not be careful enough. Clara said nothing, letting the lemon scent bloom again in the air. From the landing, she spotted her mother smiling kindly at a young couple. The woman in the cream hat had vanished. "Clara, come help me in the east corridor," her mother called. That hallway was quieter, lined with lilies and vases along the wall, golden light falling through arched windows onto patterned carpets. Clara dusted a small wooden table, her steps soundless. She liked this rhythm, steady, peaceful, away from the clamor outside. But even in that stillness, Clara was listening. She believed the world whispered its secrets to those patient enough to wait. That was when hurried footsteps echoed toward her, too frantic to belong to hotel staff. The sound stretched sharp across the corridor, carrying a strange urgency. Clara sensed something unusual was about to unfold, and perhaps, for once, she would no longer remain invisible. She raised her head from the table just in time to see a middle-aged man in a wrinkled travel coat stumble toward a housekeeper pushing a linen cart. His brow was furrowed deep, his stride restless but uncertain. He stopped short, stammering, "Japanese, anyone? Understand?" He waved his phone helplessly, his voice breaking in frustration. The housekeeper glanced briefly at Clara, then quickly turned away, gesturing toward the front desk. "Sorry, you'll have to ask them." But the man refused to move. He muttered urgently in Japanese, clutching the back of his neck, eyes wide with panic he could barely contain. Clara hadn't meant to stare, but something in his trembling voice pulled her in. He unfolded a paper covered with characters she recognized, comparing it against his glowing screen. Her mother's warning whispered in her mind. Helping sometimes meant stepping into someone's line of sight, and that was not always safe. Yet, she saw clearly, no one else would help him. Clara set down her cloth, smoothed her skirt, and took a small step forward. Her shoes barely made a sound. The man didn't notice her at first. "Excuse me," she said in Japanese, soft but perfectly clear. The man spun around, eyes wide with disbelief, staring at the small black girl of 10 who stood before him. Clara repeated the phrase, this time slower, more deliberate, her words perfectly shaped. Then, she gave a small nod toward the paper. "May I take a look?" she asked again in Japanese. The man handed it over at once, his gesture carrying the weight of trust, as though he'd just found a lifeline. His shoulders eased, the tension draining from his frame, and for the first time, his eyes stayed fixed on Clara instead of darting around in panic. She scanned the lines quickly, lips moving silently with the rhythm of the syllables, then answered him crisply in the same language. Only 3 short exchanges passed between them, but they were enough to transform his face. Confusion softened into relief. He bowed his head slightly, whispering, "Thank you," in Japanese. Clara returned the paper, gave the faintest nod, and slipped back to her work as though nothing had happened. But someone had seen. At the far end of the hall, a man in a charcoal gray vest froze, a stack of menus suspended in his hands. His eyes never followed the guest who had been helped. They stayed locked on the slight figure of the girl polishing the lilies in silence. He didn't approach, not at first. He lingered for a long breath, as though weighing a decision. He was tall, with dark hair combed neatly back, dressed with effortless precision. A golden key-shaped badge gleamed on his lapel, the mark of a maitre d', the overseer of the top-floor restaurant at the Ashford Hotel. Clara knew his name, Lucien Voss, 37 years old, known for being as cold and exact as a Swiss watch. From where she stood, Clara noticed the tiniest shift in his posture, the weight on the balls of his feet, as though he were about to step forward. But he didn't. He let her continue her task, only breaking eye contact when another employee approached with a question. He nodded curtly, then vanished behind the service door. To Clara, it was nothing more than another fleeting glance, no different from the many stares she received as a working child. She was used to it. The safest thing to do was keep her head down, keep her hands busy, and meet no one's gaze. Back in the grand lobby, Clara returned to the brass reception rail, tarnished by thousands of passing shoes. The metallic tang mixed with the scent of lemon wax as her hands rubbed rhythmically with the cloth. Her mother passed by, balancing a load of white linens, and whispered, "Almost lunchtime, finish that section and take a break." Clara nodded. From a distance, she could still see Lucien Voss speaking with the front desk staff. He stood with composure, but when his glance skimmed the room, it lingered for a beat too long on her before sliding away again. Nearby, the guest in the cream hat had returned, this time accompanied by a man in a blue-gray suit, Harold Kearse, the hotel's senior manager. His smile was polite, but the tight line of his jaw betrayed his unease as the woman scolded him sharply. Clara caught fragments of their exchange drifting across the polished lobby. Important client, lost in translation, delays are unacceptable. A passing bellhop muttered under his breath, "She's making a scene." Clara remained silent, her hands pressing the cloth into the rail. Invisibility was her best shield, but inside, she felt the truth pressing closer. Someone had seen the part of her she always kept hidden. While polishing a low table in the lounge, Clara noticed a shadow stretching across the carpet. She looked up. Lucien Voss stood over her now, hands folded behind his back, no menus in sight. His voice was low, steady. "You're Mrs. Baines's daughter." It wasn't a question. Clara straightened slightly and nodded. "Yes, sir." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing in quiet study. "You speak Japanese." Clara's hand faltered for a second before continuing its circle with the cloth. "Only a little," she answered softly. "Not many in this building can," he said, calm but layered with meaning. "Especially at the speed I just saw." Clara kept her gaze on the glossy table surface. "I only helped him find the right floor." He was nervous about being late. A silence stretched between them, pushing aside the ambient noise of the lobby. His eyes on her weren't cold. They were the eyes of a craftsman examining the grain of wood before the first cut. "Where did you learn?" he asked. Clara shrugged. "At home." His brow furrowed. "That's not something you expect from a 10-year-old. But she offered no further explanation, and he pressed no more, leaving her answer hanging in the air. His eyes drifted toward the front desk, where Harold Curse was struggling to pacify the guest in the cream hat. Lucien murmured, almost to himself, "Sometimes the right person is the one no one expects." Then, more firmly, turning back to Clara, "Walk with me a moment, will you?" Clara hesitated. Her work wasn't finished, and her mother had told her to stay in sight, but his tone left no room for refusal. It carried the weight of command already answered. Clara nodded. "Yes, sir." They crossed the crowded lobby together, heading for the staff elevators. Lucien's stride was long, yet measured enough for Clara to keep pace. She noticed the way people reacted as he passed. Backs straighter, smiles a shade more forced, conversations paused for the length of a heartbeat. That invisible authority radiated off him, and Clara felt it keenly. For the first time, she understood that stepping into his orbit meant stepping out of her shield of invisibility. The elevator chimed, its doors opening onto the unseen world behind the public floors. Stainless steel walls reflected their blurred shapes. The faint aroma of coffee mingled with the steady hum of machinery. Clara stepped inside. The doors closed with a final click, sealing her away from the rhythm of her familiar morning. For the first time all day, the cycle of her work had been broken, giving way to something unpredictable. The service elevator shuddered softly, the vibration more felt in her feet than heard. Clara stood neatly by the control panel, hands clasped in front of her. Calmly, Lucien pressed a button marked PHA code she had never seen anyone touch before. Guests only ever traveled as high as the 12th floor, where the conference suites were. When the doors finally opened, the air itself felt different, cooler, lighter, tinged with lavender and freshly roasted coffee. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, so bright that Clara had to squint. In front of her stretched the rooftop restaurant, not yet open to the public, but already prepared in perfect order. Crisp, white tablecloths covered the tables, silverware gleamed, and napkins were folded into shapes as precise as origami. Crystal glasses scattered light into thousands of fragments across the marble floor. From this height, the city unfurled endlessly tiled rooftops, bell towers, and a winding river glimmering like a ribbon of silver. "Careful now," Mr. Voss murmured, his tone calm, never condescending. Clara stepped carefully behind him, making sure not to bump into any chairs. In the reflection of a wine glass, she caught sight of herself, a small black girl with neat braids, her dark skin contrasting sharply against the white linen and crystal, looking strangely out of place in such luxury. They stopped at a long oak counter where two servers were arranging dessert plates. Their eyes flickered briefly to Clara before they returned to their tasks, leaving only a trace of quiet curiosity. Mr. Voss leaned down slightly, his voice low, almost like a lesson. This is the kind of place where conversations can change careers or entire lives. Instead, he pushed open a small door behind the counter. On the other side lay a private lounge. Once again, the world seemed to shift. Deep red leather armchairs, dark wooden bookshelves filled with hardcovers, a low table already set with coffee. The noise of the restaurant vanished, replaced by a stillness so heavy it felt like invisible soundproof walls. At the far end of the room stood Senior Manager Harold Curse beside the woman in the cream hat. Her voice was sharp, her English carrying the distinct cadence of Japanese. Curse laughed too much. His hands laced tightly in front of him, trying to mask the fact that he understood none of it. When they saw Clara, both of them turned. The woman's gaze held surprise. Curse's eyes flashed with irritation. "This is the one I mentioned," Mr. Voss said simply. "The maid's daughter?" Curse shot back bluntly, not even lowering his voice. Clara heard every word, but her expression remained steady. The air in the lounge carried its own gravity, pulling sound inward. Mr. Voss gestured toward a leather chair. Clara hesitated. It was the kind of chair meant for guests, not for someone like her. But his unwavering look left no room for refusal. She sat at the edge, her hands folded neatly on her lap. The woman in the cream hat studied her intently. Her sharp gaze answered only with a brief glance from Clara before she turned her eyes to the porcelain teacups on the table. The cups were flawless white, steam curling up from the coffee pot in fragile rings. "Clara," Mr. Voss began, "tell them how you learned Japanese." Her voice was soft but steady. "My mother's friend taught me." "Friend?" Curse leaned forward, suspicion edging his words. "A Japanese man?" Clara nodded. "Yes." "His name was Haruto." At once, the woman's expression softened slightly at the name, though she revealed nothing further. Clara continued. "Haruto worked with my father. They used to speak in Japanese when they didn't want anyone else to understand. Eventually, they taught me." Later, she paused, as though stopping at an unseen line she wasn't ready to cross. Mr. Voss didn't push. He only waited. Clara went on. "I kept his books, listened to the recordings he sent. At night, when my mother came home from her shift, she let me play them. I wrote letters to him, and he corrected my grammar before sending them back. That's how I learned." Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of a brass clock on the shelf. The woman in the cream hat studied Clara more closely, no longer just observing, but weighing. Clara sat perfectly still. She knew that explaining too much often made people think you were trying too hard. If they chose to believe her, they would. Mr. Voss finally spoke, his voice firm. "This child is here because we have a problem that cannot be solved by dictionaries or polite smiles." Curse's doubt lingered, but the woman gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She switched into Japanese, posing a difficult question. Clara answered smoothly, without hesitation. Her words carried her back to memories, the cramped apartment, candles flickering during power outages, Haruto's letters arriving every few weeks. The paper had smelled faintly of ink, each fold neat and deliberate. Clara remembered sitting beside her mother, reading those lines again and again until every stroke was etched into her mind. Her mother, Elena, gentle yet unyielding, always reminded her, "Learn in silence, Clara. The world doesn't hand out chances to the forgotten." That advice was bound to the sadness of her father's absence, a void that never left their home. Even now, seated in a sunlit private lounge high above the city, Clara felt that absence cut through her like a thin blade. Discipline, for her, hadn't come from school or sports, it had come from necessity. Cooking when her mother worked late, keeping the house clean, listening more than speaking. It taught her to observe, to calculate, to act only when the time was right. Mr. Voss's voice dropped into something close to a monologue. She taught herself while carrying the weight of a household. No one handed her anything. Curse frowned but didn't dare argue. Clara hardly noticed, her mind already arranging words like pieces on a chessboard, preparing for the next question. Another memory flickered. A small bookshop flooded with sunlight, rows of Japanese dictionaries lined neatly on the shelf. The first spark of a different path no one had imagined for her. She remembered sitting on a wooden stool, her small fingers trembling as they traced each character. Haruto's letters were always strict but never unkind, with small notes of encouragement scribbled in the margins. "Precision decides everything, Clara," he once wrote. That reminder had carved itself deep into her memory. Now, sitting in that lavish lounge, she answered the woman's sharp question in fluent Japanese, every word clear and exact, no frills, but heavy with meaning. Years of silent study had taught her that strength didn't come from speaking the loudest, but from words carefully measured. The woman gave a faint nod, her eyes gentler now. "Your persistence is admirable." Clara only dipped her head slightly, no boasting, no self-display. Her resilience spoke louder than explanations ever could. Behind her, Mr. Voss leaned back, his gaze still carrying its usual, thoughtful calculation. And in that moment, Clara understood the next test wouldn't be about language. It would be about whether she could hold her ground beneath the eyes of power, and whether the world would finally recognize the worth of a child it had always overlooked. The doors opened, leading into a small conference room. Clara quietly followed Mr. Voss and the woman in the cream hat. The polished hallway stretched like an endless mirror of lights. Inside, several executives stood clustered around a long, dark table, papers scattered across its surface, laptops glowing. At the head of the table, Harold Kearse tapped his fingers on a file, irritation plain on his face. "I've tried every interpreter," he muttered. "No one can make sense of the client's notes." The woman in the cream hat tilted her head slightly, her eyes settling on Clara. "It's time." Clara drew in a deep breath and stepped forward. The challenge was never the Japanese itself. She carried that language like a second breath. The true weight came from expectation, the piercing stares, the silent assumptions already stacked against her before she spoke a word. But she gave nothing away. Lowering her gaze to the notes, she let her eyes sweep across the hurried handwriting. Ink strokes rushed and uneven, strange gaps in phrasing, a mix of business formality and casual slang. It was like a map only someone used to quiet observation could read. "If I may," she said softly. Her voice, though gentle, sliced through the room, drawing every head toward her. At first, Clara spoke slowly, each sentence careful and deliberate. But soon her rhythm smoothed, her translation flowing not just with accuracy of words, but with the nuances and intent behind them. The executives, skeptical at first, began scribbling furiously as they listened. The realization dawned. This child was not only translating, but interpreting meaning with precision beyond expectation. Harold Kearse's frown faltered, disbelief giving way to surprise. She's capturing every shade," he whispered under his breath. The woman in the cream hat gave a slight nod, her silence a confirmation. The tense atmosphere began to ease. By the time Clara set down the last page, the room had fallen into a heavy stillness. Then, an executive leaned back in his chair with a small smile. Another exhaled sharply, as if finally released from a deadlock. Even Harold Kearse's lips twitched, caught between pride and reluctance, his expression betraying a respect he wasn't ready to admit. Off to the side, Mr. Voss gave a faint nod, the kind of gesture that said, "This was always meant to happen." Clara quietly returned the folder to the table. She added nothing more. She let the truth speak for itself. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. A child, the maid's daughter, had brought an entire room of executives to silence. The hum of the air conditioning sounded louder against the changing stares around her. Harold Kearse was the first to speak, his voice rough with hesitation. "I didn't think anyone could do this." His fingers drummed lightly on the file, reluctant, as though acknowledging her would rattle the old order. Whispered voices spread through the room. She didn't just translate, she captured the meaning. That was interpretation, not mere translation. The shift revealed itself first in posture. Backs straightened, eyes drawn to Clara, faces once indifferent now intent. Mr. Voss remained silent, arms crossed, but his stillness carried the weight of expectation fulfilled. The woman in the cream hat regarded Clara with eyes softened, the first trace of warmth slipping through her stern exterior. "In Japanese," she murmured, "extraordinary." Clara bowed her head slightly, modest. She knew pride belonged only to herself, but skill belonged to everyone who witnessed it. A young assistant, hands trembling as she adjusted her glasses, whispered to her colleague, "Did she really just do that?" The other nodded without looking away from Clara. Even Harold Kearse, the sharpest doubter, rubbed the back of his neck with a sigh, forcing out a crooked smile, the smile of a man who could no longer deny what he'd seen. The irritation, the doubt, the condescension, they had all been stripped away, replaced by reluctant acknowledgement. The rumor spread faster than footsteps. Outside in the hallway, receptionists and servers paused, peeking in with curiosity. Word of Clara's translation passed like a ripple, slipping down to the lower floors. By lunchtime, in the cafeteria, assistants whispered, "Did you hear? The cleaning girl, she stunned the executives." Their voices dropped lower, as if speaking too loud would shatter the fragile, unbelievable truth. Clara left the room with calm steps, gathering the papers neatly before exiting. She sought no applause, no praise. Her silence was her strength, and it earned her more respect than 100 words could. The conference room behind her had changed, though Clara herself remained steady. Only the way others looked at her had shifted. A child once invisible had stepped into a space even the powerful could not ignore. The story of Clara's flawless interpretation spread quickly through the corridors. Some whispered, "I thought it was a mistake," but even Curse admitted it. As Clara walked by, balancing a tray of tea, eyes fixed straight ahead, she could feel the altered weight in the glances cast her way. The hesitation in voices, the guarded tone in greetings. They didn't know her story, and they didn't need to. Her presence now carried weight of its own, quiet, undeniable. Near the elevators, maintenance workers and security guards gave her small nods, tiny gestures, almost invisible but full of recognition. Miguel, the young janitor who often swept floors with her, caught her eye and raised a shy thumbs up. Clara answered with a faint lift of her chin, just enough. No ceremony, no words. The truest respect was always the simplest. From a distance, in a half-open room, Mr. Voss and the woman in the cream hat watched in silence. "They've started to notice," Mr. Voss said quietly. The woman's smile was sharp but gentle. "And someone will resist, if only to test whether that weight can truly endure." Clara didn't know. She had already returned to her usual rhythm, wiping tables, straightening chairs, but the air around her was different now. The conversations that once passed her by now carried whispers of speculation. Some eyes held doubt, others curiosity, and in a few, there was even a flicker of admiration. On the upper floors of the building, her name began to ripple quietly. "That girl is something else. Didn't see that coming. Keep an eye on her." The murmurs spread like underground water, silent but unstoppable, shifting the way people viewed the maid's daughter who once scrubbed the floors. Clara understood that influence didn't require spectacle. With steady presence and undeniable skill, change would come on its own. By the end of the day, even Harold Curse could no longer ignore the silent tide turning toward her. The entire building seemed to breathe in a different rhythm. A child once invisible had become someone to watch. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and, by chance, met Mr. Voss's gaze. He gave her the smallest nod. She returned it with a faint smile, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. The work carried on, but perceptions had shifted. A quiet wave of recognition had just begun, and it would not be stopped. As evening settled, the golden light streamed through the tall windows of the executive offices. Clara was stacking chairs in the lounge when she heard measured footsteps approach. Mr. Voss came forward, his polished shoes making no sound on the hardwood. "Clara," he said, his tone calm, steady, free of flourish. She set the last chair neatly in place, then turned, her gaze unwavering. "I've been watching you," he continued, keeping a respectful distance. "Not just today, not just because of that notebook." His words revealed a longer scrutiny than Clara had imagined. She tilted her head slightly, listening. He paused, as if weighing her response, then said, "There is a position I'd like you to consider. This is not charity nor symbolism. You've earned it." Clara felt her fingertips tighten against her apron. She had longed for recognition, but opportunity always came with two faces, promise and risk. "What position, sir?" she asked, her voice even. "Translation support for major projects," he explained. "Client correspondence, document analysis. Demanding work, high pressure, requiring focus without ego. I need someone like you." Clara considered in silence, weighing not just the opportunity, but its consequences. Would she become a mere token, mentioned in passing? Or would this be true recognition of her worth? Her caution and patience, ingrained through years of invisibility, forced her to observe before committing. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her eyes steady on his. Mr. Voss's smile was faint, but respectful. "Then you continue as you are, quiet, diligent, excellent. But today, prove you can carry more, and that matters." Clara pressed her lips together, then gave a slow nod. Not a nod of eagerness, but of measured acceptance. "Very good," Mr. Voss replied with a slight nod of his own. "That's all I need. No promises, no spectacle. Just the work, done right." He turned and walked away, leaving Clara to stand with the weight of a new opportunity settling over her. A door had opened, but it was also a test, a long contest of endurance, subtlety, and the ability to remain true to herself. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the towering windows of the senior offices, glinting off polished brass handles. Clara entered with composure. The air here carried the scent of leather, printer's ink, and espresso. a world apart from the lemon wax and cleaning chemicals she had once known. In her hands, she carried only a small notebook and a pen. Her old uniform had been replaced by a plain gray dress, neatly tailored, professional but modest. Every step was deliberate, every gesture controlled. For years, Clara had practiced the art of being invisible, but here, invisibility had no value. Here, she had to be present, precise. Colleagues paused their conversations as she passed. Glances flickered, some appraising, some doubtful, a few resentful of the shift in hierarchy. Marcel, a seasoned analyst in a navy suit, raised his eyebrows. "So, this is the girl?" he murmured to a colleague. The other nodded, expression caught between admiration and reluctance. Clara gave no reaction beyond the faintest smile and kept walking. She knew the real battle had only begun. She nodded politely to colleagues, but said nothing. In these first moments, she knew composure and attention to detail spoke louder than pleasantries. She reached the desk assigned to her, tucked neatly between two towering bookshelves, placed her notebook down, aligned her pen, and stacked the files in order. Small rituals, yet they carried weight, they steadied her and projected quiet authority. Her first assignment arrived quickly, a client dossier requiring translation, review, and comparison. Around her, co-workers watched discreetly. Some whispered, others let skepticism show openly. Marcel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as though waiting for her to falter. Clara didn't flinch. She read line by line, her handwriting clear, corrections precise, her pace calm but unbroken. Each page was handled as though she were polishing a mirror patient, exact. By mid-morning, the whispers had shifted. "She's thorough, Anna," a young assistant whispered, surprise and respect threading her tone. Clara didn't allow herself distraction. She knew early recognition was fragile, quick to vanish like smoke. By noon, even Marcel had lowered his crossed arms, his posture less rigid. It wasn't praise, but it was an acknowledgement. Clara, small, composed, had claimed a space that had never been hers before, not by showmanship, but by precision and discipline. Taking a short break, she looked out into the courtyard below, where ordinary life went on as usual. She felt no longing for that past rhythm, only clarity. Today was a threshold, and she would cross it carefully. The conference room was hushed. Beyond the glass walls, the city's hum was reduced to a faint vibration. Clara entered, notebook tucked under her arm, her expression steady, though her heart thudded in her chest. Around the gleaming wooden table sat directors and senior analysts, their gazes sharp. Marcel was near the head of the table, skepticism etched into his posture. Mr. Voss spoke deliberately, drawing out each word. "This file is critical. One mistake could cost us millions and damage our reputation. We must complete it within 30 minutes. His eyes swept the room before landing on Clara, the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. Clara gave a small nod, checking her pen and tablet with practiced calm. Years of discipline, learned from small unnoticed tasks, now amplified in this moment. The documents were placed before her, complex spreadsheets, tangled figures, foreign notes scattered throughout. Her eyes scanned quickly, sorting, comparing, translating. The room fell utterly silent, broken only by the scratch of her pen and the occasional cough. Time stretched long and heavy. Marcel frowned, shifting in his seat. A few analysts began to whisper, their expressions unsettled. Clara paid no attention to the shifting undercurrents around her. Each note she revised, every line she translated, was handled with careful precision and steady rhythm. 28 minutes passed before she set her pen down and closed the file. Lifting her head, Clara looked directly at each person in the room, her gaze calm and unwavering. A heavy silence settled. Then, Mr. Voss exhaled, his voice low but carrying, "Perfect." Marcel sat up straighter, the slow weight of acknowledgement visible in his shoulders. Whispers rippled outward like waves. Even those who had dismissed her before could no longer deny what they'd seen. Clara neither smiled nor postured, she simply remained still. And it was that very stillness that shook the room. As she left the meeting, notebook pressed against her chest, Clara nearly collided with Anika, who came rushing in, eyes wide. I've never seen anyone do what you just did." The young woman's voice was caught between awe and disbelief. Clara only gave a small nod, letting her actions speak louder than words. Outside, the city's noise felt distant, leaving room for a private moment, a moment that confirmed discipline, focus, and quiet strength were enough to make the world pay attention. The next morning, the office carried a different air. Whispers floated through the glass cubicles and down the hallways. Clara arrived as always, her notebook in hand, hair neatly braided, her gray dress plain and modest. But this time, eyes followed her. Marcel approached without congratulations, only a curt nod. Feedback came in from the client. Perfect. They asked for your work to be included in the quarterly report. Clara brushed her fingers lightly against the notebook's edge, understanding that true value lay not in praise, but in official recognition. She followed Marcel into the central conference room. On the large screen, charts and spreadsheets filled the quarterly report. In the section of client notes, her corrections were copied word for word. And beside them, clear as ink, prepared by Clara Jensen. Silence gripped the room. Some faces showed curiosity, others jealousy, but most, including Marcel, had to concede. Anna, standing quietly near the door, whispered, "I never thought I'd see the day." Clara dipped her head slightly. She needed no applause. Public acknowledgement was enough, acknowledgement she had built with her own hands. As murmurs spread among her colleagues, Clara returned to her desk, each step deliberate but steady. She knew this milestone was not a gift, but the outcome of every calculation, every line of text, every disciplined hour. Standing by the window, gazing down at the city far below, she reminded herself recognition was only the beginning. Keeping it, that was the true challenge. Today had become a marker. Clara understood that clearly. It was proof subtle but undeniable that presence, patient focus, and skills honed in silence could open the doors of worlds once shut. A rare smile flickered at her lips after so many months of quiet labor. She returned to her desk, her movements still precise and restrained, a reminder to herself that greatness never needed spectacle. Sometimes it required only silent acknowledgement, a name on a report, a nod in the right direction. A room that had witnessed for itself. The office soon returned to its usual rhythm, the soft chatter of keyboards, the low hum of conversation. Clara moved through the familiar space with her trademark composure almost invisible. But her invisibility was not what it had been. Now, when colleagues glanced up, their eyes lingered longer with curiosity, with cautious respect, and with quiet admiration. Anna, the young assistant, was the first to approach. Clutching a small folded note, her hands trembled. I wanted to thank you," she whispered. "You showed me that paying attention, really paying attention, matters." She slipped the paper into Clara's hand without daring to meet her eyes. Unfolding it, Clara read the neatly written lines. "You reminded me that the smallest actions, done with full care, echo louder than words. I will try to notice more." A faint smile touched her lips. This wasn't just gratitude. It was a ripple born of her quiet presence. Hours later, even Mr. Voss appeared at her desk, a rare sight for a man of his position. His voice was low, meant only for her. "What you did yesterday, the accuracy, the speed, it saved us from disaster. I don't often say this, but you should know it didn't go unnoticed." He extended his hand. The handshake was brief, but more genuine than any formal commendation. All that day, small gestures piled up. A coffee waiting at her desk. A silent nod from Marcel as he passed. A file returned with a bold checkmark across the top. Each one modest, yet heavy with meaning. By afternoon, Clara stood on the balcony, the wind tugging at her braid. She thought of all the years spent unseen, the quiet labor that had gone unnoticed. Now, in these understated acts, she felt her worth radiate, not in noise or spectacle, but in a personal, lasting way. A memory surfaced, her mother's voice, teaching her to do every task with care, even when no one was watching, that had built the endurance that now made others take notice without her ever demanding it. Today's gestures were not mere thanks. They were confirmation that her values, patience, precision, discipline, were worth something. Clara returned to her desk with the same familiar composure, but her shoulders felt lighter. The silent gratitude surrounding her wasn't a performance. It was truth revealed, skill recognized without display. And in that moment, Clara reclaimed dignity not only for herself, but for every unseen hand that quietly shaped the world. The next morning, the conference room felt colder than usual. Clara sat at the far end of the table, her hands folded neatly as she listened to Mr. Hughes review the success of a recent deal, one in which she had played a crucial part. Then, another voice cut in. "Impressive," said Stanton, the silver-haired director notorious for undercutting others. "But should we really give credit for this to a child?" His tone was mild, but the blade was hidden within it. uneasy glances flickered around the room. Hughes said nothing, his eyes shifting toward Clara. Stanton leaned back, continuing, "Let's be realistic. She's just the maid's daughter. No degree, no formal training. Who's to say that translation wasn't pure luck?" Each word dropped like a stone into water. Clara's gaze never wavered. "It wasn't luck," she answered quietly. Stan's lips curved in a thin smile. "Then, prove it." A dense Japanese contract was slid across the table. Clara read slowly, her finger tracing each line. The room held its breath. Then she spoke, steady and unhurried, translating not just the words but their tone, their intent. She pointed out a clause. Misinterpreted, it would cost the company millions. Her voice was calm, precise, never raised. By the time she finished, Stanton's smirk had vanished. The silence that followed was not doubt, but recalibration. Hughes closed the file with a decisive thud. "That's enough." Clara gave a small nod, her hands folding together again. No triumph, no need for flourish. The work had spoken for her. For the first time, Stanton looked at her not as the maid's daughter, but as a peer at the table. The test had come sooner than anyone expected. That afternoon, the company received an urgent call from Tokyo. A partner threatened to withdraw unless a critical misunderstanding was resolved within the hour. The documents had already been through 3 translators, all unsuccessful. Hughes looked directly at Clara. "You're coming with me." The conference room was thick with tension. The screen flickered to life, revealing 4 stern faces speaking Japanese at lightning speed. Clara stood quietly behind Hughes's chair, her ears tuned to every word. Within half a minute, she caught the mistake, an idiom mistranslated, its meaning completely reversed. Without waiting for permission, she stepped forward, bowed slightly toward the screen, and spoke in flawless Japanese. She carefully rephrased the company's position with accuracy and respect. Her words were gentle, yet carried undeniable weight. The shift was immediate. The faces on the screen softened. One man even smiled. They nodded, agreeing to continue the partnership. When the call ended, the room fell into silence. Hughes turned to Stanton, his voice calm but edged with authority. "That's the difference between luck and skill." Clara stepped back, her expression composed. Inside her chest, though, she felt a sharp release, the kind of ache that comes when a skill long hidden finally finds its moment of necessity. Stanton lowered his head briefly. "I was wrong." There was no applause, no grand declaration, just the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of papers. But in the glances around the room, Clara saw the change. Curiosity had shifted to respect. And she didn't need to say another word. The proof was there, undeniable. As the day wound down, Hughes asked Clara to stay. The others filed out, their footsteps fading down the corridor. He regarded her with an unusual look, not just that of a superior, but of someone who had just witnessed a truth revealed, that an invisible girl was rewriting the rules of the room. Hughes leaned lightly against the edge of the table, arms folded, his voice low. "Tomorrow, you should say something to them. They need to hear it from you." Clara shook her head. "I'm not here to give speeches." "Maybe not," Hughes replied, not harsh, but firm. "But sometimes, the quietest voice is the one people remember most." The next morning, during the daily briefing, Hughes gave Clara a small nod. At once, every eye turned toward the small black girl standing beside the coffee service. Clara didn't move to the front. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke. "I only want to say this. People don't always look like what they know, or the places they've been. I'm here because my mother cleans this building. Sometimes I help her. That's all most of you have ever seen." Her gaze swept the room, steady and unblinking. But skills don't vanish just because life changes. They wait until someone is willing to see them. A stillness settled across the room, not awkward silence, but the kind that comes when truth suddenly pierces through something obvious yet long overlooked. Clara gave a small bow, then stepped back. No dramatic pause, no expectation of applause. Hughes immediately resumed the agenda. Yet the atmosphere had shifted, lighter, less guarded. Later that day, walking through the lobby, Clara noticed 2 employees she had never spoken to before give her a slight nod. Small gestures, but genuine, and that was enough. That evening, the building was nearly empty. The hum of the vending machine echoed as the loudest sound in the lobby. Clara sat on a low wooden chair, waiting for her mother to finish her shift. In her hands, she held a small cloth bag she had carried for years. Inside was an old photograph, her mother, much younger, standing in front of a school in Kyoto, Japan. Beside her was a little Clara, a black child with tightly coiled hair cut short, clutching the hem of her mother's skirt. It was the last picture before they left Japan. Clara traced the worn edges with her finger, the memory surfacing as fresh as if it were yesterday. Her mother appeared from the hallway, still in gloves, her hair pinned up tight. She gave the familiar, tired smile, but her eyes remained soft. "All finished?" Clara asked. "All finished," her mother replied, pushing the cleaning cart against the wall. They stepped outside together, into the night. Across the street, city lights reflected on rain-wet pavement, turning the corner into a brilliant painting of color and shimmer. Clara said nothing more. She didn't need to. Her mother's hand reached down, clasped hers, and squeezed once. Inside the building behind them, the stories about the girl who spoke fluent Japanese would likely continue. Maybe tomorrow people would see her differently. Maybe not. But under the soft glow of the streetlights, with the damp air heavy with the scent of the city and the distant hum of traffic, it no longer mattered. Clara knew what she carried with her. Not just language, but memory, perseverance, and pride in where she came from. And that, no one could ever take away. Inside the building behind them, the stories about the girl who spoke fluent Japanese would likely continue. Maybe tomorrow people would see her differently. Maybe not. But under the soft glow of the streetlights, with the damp air heavy with the scent of the city and the distant hum of traffic, it no longer mattered. Clara knew what she carried with her. Not just language, but memory, perseverance, and pride in where she came from. And that, no one could ever take away. If this story touched you, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them with me in the comments below.